Rockets draft time, because they are drafted in the top 5 unless some horrible winning streak occurs to end the game. Okay, James, I'm just going to ask you real quick. We're going to go pick by pick. And if the Rockets have that pick, who would you like them to pick with that pick? Pretty
yeah.
simple.
Okay. Let's. Yeah.
Pick number 1. Who would you take if you were the Houston Rockets?
Chet Holmgren.
Do you think it needs much? Give me a 30-second explanation of why. That's why, because I'd also do that. What's your 30-second explanation on that?
I think he has the highest ceiling in the draft. I think he's the only especially unique player in the draft. And I had this theory that uniqueness lends itself to stardom, like he's extremely mobile and fluid for a guy his height, the fluidity especially. To me, what I see once he puts 20 pounds on or whatever is an elite rim protector, an elite drop coverage center who can be a second or third option on offense. And like having a defensive anchor that's also a two-way player is extremely valuable. And I just think he's got the highest ceiling in the draft, man.
Yeah. And the thing I love about him is that, like, I think he's one of these guys, and this is, I've talked about with superstar players, is like, I like guys that make rosters work. And I think he's one of these unique guys where it's like, I think he could play next to Alperen Şengün on offense and defense, right? Like, I think he's mobile enough to kind of cover fours and be a weak side guy, right? And so like that to me is what I like, is that he can be a threat defensively and offensively at all 3 levels. And like that makes lineups work. Is it the perfect fitting with him and Şengün? Who knows? But I think like it could work in theory, which is all you want when you have a guy that you think could be an all-star and a guy who you hope could be an MVP. Number 2 pick. If you were the Raphael Stone and you got the number 2 overall pick, who are you taking?
I'm taking Jabari Smith Jr. So, I mean, I'm pretty much sticking to a lot of the consensus takes right now. I think the comparison between Bari and Paulo Banchero is interesting and instructive. I think that Paulo, in a sense, has a higher floor because I believe Paulo Banchero is like going to be a star player in the NBA. I just believe that he's going to be a low-level star. And I believe he's going to be the type of player that you commit 35 million a year to, 40 million a year to, and then a few years into that contract, you realize like, fuck, man, now we're strapped and he's not living up to that, right? Like, maybe a Blake Griffin type or something like.
I don't know. Blake Griffin was good. Injuries.
Blake Griffin was good. Okay,
really
well,
good. I don't think he's ever going to be Blake Griffin. Like peak Blake Griffin, people forget was like a real good player.
That's you're right. It's a bad example. Well, Julius Randle, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
like,
I agree with that.
Juwan Howard, like one of these guys. It's like,
there it is.
Yeah, like it's like, okay, yeah, he's a star level player, but he's like not a high level star. So if he's one of your 2 or 3 max contract slots, one of your real building blocks, you hamstring a team, right? So that's my concern with Paulo. I don't really see a guy that's likely to be like a top 20 player. I see a surefire top 30 player, whereas Jabari Smith Jr., I think like has the potential to be much better than that. He also has the potential to be lower than that, but his floor is probably a really high level 3-and-D wing. So to me, I'm like, I would rather take the guy that could be an elite role player and could be a superstar over the guy that like almost certainly will be an all-star, but doesn't have those foundational tools. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, I get it. And I agree. Like, I think Jabari Smith, I would take him as well over Paolo, but I'm not a big Paolo fan. He like Jabari Smith has like physical advantages that will follow him to the NBA.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, he can't dribble. I'm like, it's true. He can't dribble, but if you can shoot really well, guess who also doesn't dribble? Klay Thompson, right? Like if he ends up becoming a really good shooter and he looks like he'll probably be, I mean, I think just with his size and lateral mobility, at worst, he will be an average defender. Unless
he'll be better than an average defender,
and that's what I'm saying. Like that's at worst. Like that's like
worst.
It's like like he'll be an average defender without fucking trying, right?
Right.
So like to me, it's like his floor is really valuable. It's like, oh, this is a 2-way player. Is he going to guarantee you have a big role on offense? No, but like if you're the Rockets, you just drafted a shooting guard, number 2 overall last year. Like you don't necessarily need a guy who needs to be the focal point of the offense.
Yeah.
And like you said, like the upside, like if he gets a bit of a handle, who fucking knows? Like this dude could be like Kevin Durant.
He could be an MVP candidate if he gets a handle. It's a huge if, because a
Yes.
handle, yeah, is kind of one of the harder skills to develop like at this stage in a player's career, but you can't rule it out.
I think it's easier to develop your handle to the point that he would need because he has such a good shooter and he has so many physical advantages. Like he doesn't need to be Kyrie Irving. He just needs to like not get bitched by the University of Miami. Okay, let's move on to the number 3 pick. If you're the 3rd pick, who are you taking if you're the Rockets?
I'm begrudgingly taking Paulo Banchero.
Ooh,
Yeah, I mean,
no.
I'm not big on him. I'm not high on him,
Mm,
but at this point with the available options, like,
mm,
I mean, to be honest with you, what I would love the team to do, really, what I'm doing is I'm trading down. Actually, that if I was a general manager, I would trade for the 5th or 6th pick and a future 1st round pick and an interesting young player. But I have so little faith that that's what the front office will do that I'm not even really entertaining the option. You know?
So I'm not a big Paolo fan. That's why I'm not taking him 3. If I'm the Rockets, I take Jaden Ivey
Okay.
because I just think Jaden Ivey could be a great defensive player.
Yep.
And he is so crazy athletic. And if you get him, you get rid of KPJ, which is like basically all I'm gunning for the Rockets at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
No, but like, no, I'm just thinking like if you have a backcourt of Jaden Ivey and like Jalen Green, that's a dynamic backcourt that can create its own shot, can take turns as these like, hyper athletic combo guards. Jalen Green isn't like, he's a good shooter, right? Like he is a good shooter. So it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, well, like, can either of them shoot threes? Like, I think you could just fucking blitz people with those 2 guys. And it would be like, no one can stay in front of either one of them. Like, imagine having 2 of those guys and just have fun with it. Like, that's what I would do because if we go with the 4th pick, you'd probably say Ivy, right?
Yes, I would. Yeah.
And I
Now,
would probably say Banchero. And it's just like my issue with Banchero is very simple. It's just he looks to me he won't have many physical advantages. He doesn't have a post game really. Isn't a great shooter. He has a pretty good handle, but without physical advantages, like a handle is only so good. And his passing is pretty good, but it's like he's not a point guard, but like the appeal of him are the point guard skills, and he can't cover centers, right? Like, so it's just I just don't think Banchero's a player that like, I was saying like I like Chet, how like he covers up your deficiencies and you can kind of plug him next to anyone. Banchero feels like somewhere it's like you need a very specific team around him for it to all work. Similar to Zion Williamson. The difference is Zion Williamson is super fucking special, and Banchero is like, as you're saying, like, you know, he'll probably be a top 50 player, but he probably won't ever be a top 25 player, which means like, why take him that high?
you know what concerns me? That I he reminds me of Jabari Parker. That I think that's all I really need to say. Like, okay, Clutch fans tweeted this out, and I thought it was a good tweet. Like, how many superstar players are not great 3-point shooters and they're not great defenders? Like, it's pretty rare. Those are kind of the 2 most foundational skills, and then everything else builds outwards, right? And you don't need to be elite. Like, 3-and-D players are role players, yes, but most superstars are good at least one of those things and just also shot creating, ball handling, playmaking, whatever, right? So he's got that stuff, but he can't really shoot threes and he doesn't really seem like he can defend. So it's like, is he going to be that great at like getting to the hole and creating for himself and others that it's not going to matter? It
I,
seems unlikely,
and
right?
I don't think so because he doesn't have any physical advantages for an NBA player. He's someone when you watch
Yeah.
in college, people are like, oh, he's so good. I'm like, dude, like he's just bigger and stronger than these guys. But at the NBA, guys are going to be as big as him and as strong as him.
Yeah,
And
man.
like the question is, it's like, well, is he going to get more explosive? Right. And like, I don't know. Cause if you look at his body, you go, how much more explosive can he really get if he's not already like, it's, I don't want to say like his body is done, but he looks like someone who's like physically much more mature than a lot of these other prospects. And maybe that's just because he'll be like a fucking Hulk at his peak. But then if he's that big, like, is he going to be quick? Is he going to be explosive? Is he just going to end up being like, I don't know. To me, he just seems like a worse version of like DeMarcus Cousins mixed with Julius Randle.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's
Now,
like those guys don't get you very far.
yeah. Boogie was robbed of his prime a little bit, but I feel what you're saying more generally anyway. Yeah. Let's move on to the real meat of the discussion, though, man. The 5th overall pick.
Yes.
And what do you do? Well, you ask me because that's the format here.
What, James, if you're the Houston Rockets general manager, Raphael Stone, and you get the 5th pick because the lottery gods are against you, what do you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, first of all, it really depends whether Shaden Sharp is declaring, and it's hard to project what might happen without knowing that, because I'm taking Shaden Sharp for sure. If he's in the draft, like, I know that a lot of guys dominate high school and then they get to the college and NBA level, and there's a little bit of fool's gold involved, but he has flashed like some pretty crazy potential, and I would take him as a pure upside grab, because there aren't a lot of players in this draft with star potential outside of that range, right? And that's why, if we assume that Sharp is not declaring, I hope that the Rockets at least think outside the box. I guess the consensus picks right now would be either like Keegan Murray, Jalen Duren, or Adrian Griffin Jr., right? Like, none of those guys move me all that much. I do like Keegan Murray's game, but in fact, right now, based on my limited knowledge, I would probably take Keegan Murray. But I hope that they will look at some guys that aren't expected to go in this range, like Jeremy Sochan, see if they particularly like him. He's got a lot of defensive potential, or Terry Eason, or like I'm blanking on names right now. Those two guys in particular, maybe Ty Washington, even. Like, he looks like he could be a pretty good guard. No, maybe not Ty Washington so much, but like, I just hope they're willing to think outside the box if they have the 5th pick, because it's a 4-man draft, right? Assuming Sharp's not declaring. There are 4 players. Like, we all know who the top 4 is going to be, right? Sharp, no Sharp, those are going to be the top 4. So when you draft outside of that range, I think it's prudent to think outside the box. Like, the Raptors taking Scotty Barnes was genius, right? The Thunder taking Josh Gidey was a really good move, and that came way out of nowhere. He was looking more like the 10th or 11th pick, but they trusted their scouting and they trusted their instincts, and it paid off. So I'm not even saying like go draft Jeremy Sochan with the 5th overall pick. I'm just saying I hope they consider doing something that kind of drops jaws a little bit.
Yeah, so I think they should take Shaden Sharp, and I don't think they need to use the 5th pick. So what I would do is, honestly, I think they should just trade back, because if you want to think outside the box, trading back, getting an extra pick, something like that, maybe it can help you move up in another draft, or whatever. I think they should trade back if they get the 5th pick. And, because there's like 3 guys that are kind of in that 5, 6, 7 range where it's like, whichever one you like more. If you trade back, you probably could still get one of them. And if the real question is, where would Shaden Sharp go if he declares? Because I do agree 100% that if they get the 5th pick, that's the guy that they should target. But I don't think you would necessarily need the 5th pick. So,
well, you'd have to have some intel, I guess. But also, my whole rant was on the
course.
assumption that he doesn't declare.
Yeah, and like but I do agree that's like he's the guy that I would want. But depending on like who you trade that 5th pick to, you can kind of, you basically guarantee that they're not going to select him, right? And I think that's what I would do if he does declare. I don't know. Like, I would just trade out of it and see if I couldn't get another pick, right? Or something, because Keegan Murray, like, he could be good, but like, why do you want that if you're the Rockets right now? Like, what does he really do? Jalen Duren. I think, for instance, like, I think there'll be a Jalen Duren like prospect next year and the year after that. Like, I think there'll be a guy that like we can be just as excited about for a lot of similar reasons in a year or so. And so like that's kind of how I view that situation with Duren. It's like, very valuable type archetype, but just like can't we find this guy in the next draft? Like, there are really big athletic guys seemingly every year.
No
Like who
doubt.
was like Kai Jones last year, right? Like, didn't shoot up draft boards like Duren, but like similar types of dudes that maybe you could get with a later pick, because you got to remember, the higher you pick a guy, the more you have to pay them.
Yeah. Let me say a couple of things before we should take it home. But I got to get these thoughts off, though. First of all, what I like about Murray is I take Keegan Murray operating under the assumption that like we suck again next year, right? Because then when it's time to get good, like he boosts you instantly. Like to me, he's a real connective player, So like we're probably trash next year, but if it requires a lot of luck, but if we were to land Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson, he instantly elevates those guys. He's one of those players. So I like him from that perspective. Second thing I want to say is this is sort of a broader idea that I have about like knowledge and the truth, okay? And trying to discern the truth. When there is a widespread consensus, you should be more apprehensive to go against it in a sense. Like if everybody thinks something, it increases the probability that it's right. I could try to tell you that the sky is green, but everybody thinks the sky is blue. It's probably blue. On the other hand, when there's less consensus, it increases the room for critical thinking. You know what I'm saying? So if we're drafting 5th and there's no Shaden Sharp, like the rule book goes out the window because there's no consensus 5th overall pick, right? Whereas there's a consensus top 4. You can go ahead and take fucking Yannick Noza with the 4th overall pick if you want, but it makes you a crackpot, At 5, you could take a lot of guys. I think if Adam Silver gets up there and says the 5th overall pick is Terry Eason, to me, I'm gonna feel like that team probably saw something,
I actually like, but that's my point. It's like I like him, and I don't think you'd need the 5th pick to get him. Like that's why I'm saying trade back, because I 100% agree with what you're saying. It's just like it's all based upon your intel, what you think, what other people think. If you see a guy that you're like, we would take him with the 5th pick, but we won't need to do that.
Yeah, you run a risk, but yeah, you're right. Like, yeah, you're right.
Fucking do that. Like I'm telling you, it's like, remember the Luka Doncic pick, right? He was picked 3rd by the Hawks. Trae Young was selected 5th by the Mavericks, and they flipped him. That fucking means someone didn't take Trae Young at 4 when that was obviously ended up being the best player. I think it was Josh Jackson, who's basically
I think so.
Now, right? So it's like teams kind of like, Dallas and Atlanta made that trade like they knew what was going to happen, right? So these teams know by draft day, usually that high up, they kind of have a good sense of who is going to take who in that direct proximity, especially in the first 5-10 pick range. So that's the only reason why I would say trade back, because you probably know who you can get if you like go from 5 to 7 and pick up like a pretty good second rounder, right? Like if you get the team with the 7th pick, second round pick, that's like the 37th pick. That's a good pick. That's not like the 55th pick. You get that and the 7th pick. You get the guy you want. You get someone that's interesting, you put on your G League team, right? Like,
man, I like what you're saying there, especially because there are actually 2 centers specifically that I like who are likely to be second round picks. Like I like them in the sense that they at least fit the archetype of a rim protector. And like, I would love to take a gamble on either of them. Yannick Noza, who I had referenced already. And I don't know how to say the other guy's name, but it's like, oh man, hold on.
Is Yannick Nosa
Baji? What's that?
Is Nosa Belgian?
I think he is I think he's born in Africa and he's an immigrant in Europe. He's Congolese.
So that make it likely that he is Belgian. If he
right. Yeah, true enough. Yeah, I think he might be. He's interesting, man. He like, you probably know this, but 6-7 months ago, he was a lottery pick. He was perceived as a lottery pick, but he is truly atrocious on offense. I've watched enough tape to say that. Like he can barely catch the ball, right? But man, he's got a lot of potential on defense. I'm trying to find the name of the other guy. Ibu Baji. Possibly he plays
Bro,
for FC Barcelona.
you gotta find prospects with names you can pronounce.
Yeah, well, I'll figure it out if he gets on the team. Uh, Abu Baji plays for FC Barcelona. Also likely to go undrafted, but he's he moves his feet well for a 7-footer, and like some of these guys are worth the flyer. So I like the idea of trying to buy a 2nd-round pick.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I feel is like. I agree with you. It's like if you get the 5th pick, unless the guy that you want, is not going to be there after 5, if you trade off of it, move back, get the guy you want, and maybe get something else. Because you got to remember, they gave up a pick to get Şengün.
Yeah.
Right? Like it wasn't their pick, but they gave up a pick. They're not going to have their own pick not in 2 years. Right? So like there's a reason to get another pick. And the other thing is like Rockets fans forget, like the Nets deal netted them a bunch of pick swaps, right? Like there's a very low probability that any of those pick swaps they activate anytime soon.
Yeah.
Right? Like now that I think about it, like when they don't have their pick, can they even pick swap? Right? Like, and so that's what I'm saying. She's like, trade back, add a few extra resources and get the guy that maybe you want. But at the end of the day, I think we both agree, if Shaedon Sharpe is declared, that's the guy they should target.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
It's just he's a mystery box, and there's a chance that if he had played this year, he's number 1.
His athletic gifts are pretty ridiculous, man. So,
and he's Canadian, right? Like you need that. You need that connection. You need the Canadian connection to Houston. That's what
let's wrap it up, man. Let's wrap it up.
Okay, that's the end of the Rockets roundup. Me and James would make a great GM pairing.
Hell yeah.
We would lead the Rockets back to the play-in tournament. Actually, the play-in tournament for the first time in franchise history. That's how good we would be. We'd get them there. I can guarantee you that much. All right.